And this is David Gill, Performance Lab Director of VERT, with a special, we'll call it a coronavirus edition of VERT Athlete. I have with me Natosha Gottlieb. She's the Assistant Director of Olympic Sports Strength Conditioning at Florida State University. Natosha, thanks for hopping on.
Thank you for having me.
So the reason we're doing this call and recording it is because we've been having at VERT, we've been having a lot of conversations with different programs, oftentimes with sports medicine, strength conditioning, athletic training, talking about the changes being made, things athletes are doing at home now because they're going the longest period of almost their lives without formal training. You and I were just talking about it, and I figured we'd just get on here and be able to share with more athletes. So give me a little bit about, what are you focusing on right now kind of with your athletes with the fact that they're away in mind?
So I think the biggest thing for us right now is trying to get our ladies to understand muscles will be okay, right? Like for the most part, if someone had a base of strength and they're doing the right things while they're away through some pretty creative methods, but muscles will be fine. It's tendons, right? We're thinking Achilles tendinopathy, patella tendon issues, things that need progressive load over a certain amount of time in order for it to feel comfortable. So the biggest thing we've expressed to our athletes right now is while you're away, we still need to be doing some jumping. We still need to be doing some isometric holds that put those tendons under load. And then as we get closer and closer to whether that's coming back or closer and closer to coming back and then starting practice or play, the volume of that will increase. Obviously, we need to be in a situation where we're safe and we're landing on surfaces that aren't concrete all the time. But at the same time, there does need to be an understanding that this idea that the only thing we need to do while everybody's away is continue to keep our strength, I believe that's inaccurate. We need to have some sort of capacity built up because your muscles will probably be okay. If you were strong before and you continue to keep some level of activity and strength building while you're away, even if it's with random artifacts you can find in the apartment, you'll probably be fine when you get back. But your tendons, if that's going to be the first time you're trying to build a work capacity and sustain whatever load, even if it's a small one, or we're just risking a lot of things from an injury perspective.
Yeah, so that's the thing where you've got these, the great athlete, these are collegiate level athletes. They're going to come back and coaches might see, and even if they're monitoring with a vert monitor, for example, like, oh yeah, they're flying, they're still jumping high. But as you mentioned before, that's not so much the concern. And if you could, for those kind of listening, what is give a little more insight into what it is to build eccentric load and why it is you want to build eccentric load right now because of the landing side.
Right. And what I told our team in this time is, I'm sure I want you to jump, but now that we're getting closer and closer, I need you to stop. When I say stop, I mean stop in the mechanisms and under the speeds, and that's the part that's really important that we're going to see on the court. So that means run 5 yards and then come to a fast deceleration. Jump, land on one leg, but pull yourself down. Fall off of a box and stick it. Run, plant, cut, and come back. The issue is going to be if the first time we get back on the court is the first time we see those type of speeds in a stopping action, it will be a problem because that's not the type of thing you can just recreate or by doing slower eccentric movements. The thing people misunderstand about the weight room is that we are recreating volleyball in the weight room, and that is completely incorrect. In some ways, we try to get close, but in actuality, we're building a capacity and building some resiliency to what we will see on the court. It's very difficult to simulate the stopping and eccentric speeds of jumping and cutting and then jumping that we're going to see on a volleyball court unless we actually put them into practice. So whether it's fall off a box, plant and cut, jump, land, jump again, plant and cut. We've done some like drop catches where we drop a heavy load, re-respond, and come to a stop. We do a ton of those stopping actions on campus, and it's just known as like depth drops or depth jumps or repetitive jumping plyos, so to speak. Well, we need to be able to recreate that now. And for liberos, the same thing. We need to be able to recreate, go real fast and stop, because that is going to be the most dangerous thing once we get back on the court.
Yeah, and again, during this time, I think everyone kind of takes a step back. You start educating yourself further. I'm having countless calls with organizations, with coaching staffs, and it's been mainly on the sports science, athletic training, strength conditioning. Those are the voices that are kind of raising up as like, hey, if we have 2 weeks, then we go jump into match play, there are real concerns there. What was fascinating to us, because obviously on the business end, there's a lot of frozen budgets. We've had quite a few programs be able to bring Vert on board now because we're put under essential, which is awesome in that they're recognizing now more than ever having an objective feedback. Again, be that Vert or in other sports, something else, but having an objective measure is going to be important because like we've talked about, if you come back and you start the athletes really high, that can have a negative effect throughout the entire rest of the season from an injury perspective. But if we are given the time to do the strength work to complement that court work and build them both together, yeah, that's where we see those programs. Like I know you've helped dramatically diminish injury issues with your programs, and a lot of programs have done the same just by slowly building that capacity.
Right, and I think the capacity piece is important. The speed of movement piece is important. But at the end of the day, we're preparing for this very specific workload, right? Like there's a place in number of jumps, a place in number of landings, a place in high stress movements that we're going to see in even our hardest matches. And at the end of the day, we're trying to be prepared for slightly above that, but everything below it mostly. And so we're trying to be prepared for that. And the thing about this entire situation that's going to be tough for everybody is coaches that are very dependent on a coach's eye or a feel or a measure that's a little bit based purely in instinct. Well, this is going to be difficult because right now, I know us personally, we have some that have equipment, some that have nothing, some that have an entire field worth of space, some that have nothing but their apartment. So then we're dealing with people coming at for different measures, and you have no idea how everyone's been training outside of what the strength coach is giving them. So the biggest thing I can say would be helpful in the situation is a way to quantify. If you can't quantify the loads you're putting on people right now when they come back, I would argue it would be almost impossible to do your best to mitigate whether it be a workload injury or a like specificity injury from a standpoint of like, ooh, she hasn't landed with that much force in a really long time. And so we're going to be playing like the both ends of that spectrum. And you got to have a way to quantify workload, but then also quantify those landing forces, because even in the stuff I'm giving out, I can't rightfully go tell my outside like, hey, go jump as high as you possibly can right now and land as much force as you will when you hit a ball. Like that's not going to happen. So when she comes back, obviously we're trying to simulate those things. But when she comes back, we need to be able to be clear about, hey, week one, once her landing percentage gets this heavy, we need to be careful with that and kind of have a very strategic plan going into that. And if you can't quantify it, then you can't really make a plan.
Yeah, and another thing you and I talked about, and I've talked about this with a number of people in the sports science community within volleyball, is coaches were asking us, okay, dream scenario, we come back, typically you have 2.5, 3 weeks, and we're recommending that if programs are able to get those 5 weeks with contact, ideally, and then programs are asking like, so where does that number come from? So to review that quickly, what we're looking at here is, as we've talked about, we don't want to start too high, and then you're afraid to start too low because you need to get them to match level. But over the course of 5 weeks, and the beginning jump number admittedly is a bit arbitrary, but even if you say we're starting at, and again, this isn't something you live and die by, right? But if we start to say 60 jumps, over the course of 5 weeks, we can grow that by 10 to 15%, right? And then by the time it's match play, we're practicing in those hundreds safely, and realistically, on average, a 4-set match, a middle might break, 105, 110 jumps, right? 3-set match, they're not even getting into the hundreds. 5-set match, crazy 5-set match, middle blocker, about 160, right? 3 rotation outside, 120-ish if she's very active. So having those numbers now as a starting point, I think is probably, more important than ever before, just to get the season kicked off when things get back to normal.
100%. And I think something else to take into account is training age, right? Like we have our athletes coming in, and just like we talked about in a call before this, the ideas of we jumped in the spring, so therefore we have a capacity for the fall. Not necessarily. If I have a freshman that came in January, we can build some capacity and build some resiliency in the spring. But just like if none of this was going on and the ladies were to either go home or even stay on campus and just open gym, we can't expect whatever capacity we built in the spring to still be there when we get to the fall. Well, this situation is even more drastic. So it then comes into play of like, okay, what's our freshman resiliency level relative to our seniors resiliency level? Or are we at a place where we treat everyone the same for X amount of time and then let those differences start to kind of manifest themselves? So again, the only way you can kind of make those decisions and be informed about it is to be able to quantify what's going on, and then you hope that everybody's doing something while they're away. But I think initially an approach that, you're right, it's a little bit arbitrary, but it's also it's necessary in these moments, and then see how everybody responds to that initial arbitrary workload and then make changes from there.
Yeah, got to start from somewhere. And obviously, while we're, you and coaches are not allowed to monitor, in the end, the safest thing to do is you have to make certain assumptions that, they're not getting in these capacities. But no, this was awesome, Natosha. Thanks as always for jumping on and chatting with me. We have links on our website. You can reach out to us, and also people like Natosha are just being incredibly charitable with their time and information, because in the end, this is about the athletes, right? And like I say in a lot of these videos now, Vert customer or not, we are having conversations with people, making sure that programs are just educated to move forward in the safest way possible. So again, Natosha, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon. Stay safe.
Thanks.